Good evening, everyone. This is the Monday, February 12th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting. Christina, will you please do the roll call?
Stewart?
Here.
Ganona? Here. Mitchell?
Here.
Rigby?
Here.
Naja? Here. Ewing? Commissioner Chair Diana Moreno is excused today, and Mboop?
Thank you, Christina. And we'll go on to the City Council update from Councilor Memboop.
Thank you, President. Yeah, Chair. Yes, I have not a lot. I have update from January 30th. The City Council met for a special meeting. As you know, it was a nice meeting, bittersweet. We lost Anthony, who's now on the other side in California. He was a figure that really helped the city on the wastewater treatment plant. He did a great work with EPCOR, and it was his last day, but also it was the last day we were ending our partnership with EPCOR. And, they did a wonderful work also. They make a design, 90%, of the design, which was an amount, I think, of $7,175,000, I think, something like that, that we authorized the city manager to pay them. So we asked staff to find another specialist of this work. Not EPCOR. I don't think EPCOR will be part of that, but staff will find us someone who will design. It will be a design, operate, manage, a new water treatment plant at the foothills. So that was that special meeting. So we had a good run with EPCOR, but we come to a point when the pricing of the water treatment plant was really high for us. And we have also our out counsel, who are advising us on this, are telling us that we can find something that's not that expensive and that can be better as what EPCOR was proposing to the city. So, and on February 6th, we had, the regular council meeting, and it was about something probably planning department work on that, in the appeal of that, the tree application. It was an appeal of type 2-3 removal, on Wembley Parkway. So you know about that, you are familiar, and the council denied the appeal and, consider what the DRC decided. So I think that's the only thing I have for today. Yep, I think that's what I have. So if you have any question, I give to answer.
Thank you, Councilor Memboop. Any questions? Appreciate the update. Thank you.
And because are you working on something that should I be here because it will probably come to council, or
certainly
I can? Okay, yeah.
You certainly can remain. It's a legislative matter, so it's not an ex parte question.
Okay.
So certainly.
Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda, we'll have approval of the minutes from our last public planning commission meeting from January 2024. Do we have any comments, questions, or a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Christina, you want to call?
Stewart?
Yes.
Quinone? Quinone? Yes. Mitchell?
Yes.
Rigby?
Yes.
Najak?
Abstain?
Ewing?
I think it carries with 4 approves and 1 abstention. Thank you. Moving on to item number 5. Moving on to section 6, the Commission for Citizen Involvement, general updates. And I think we have 2 updates here. The first one is the West Ridge Neighborhood Association General Meeting will be held Thursday, February 15th at 7 p.m. at the Stafford, 1200 Overlook Drive. And we have a second update here from the proposed Mary's Landing Neighborhood Association. They will be having a meeting, and I believe they will be voting on sending the application to the city. And that meeting will be held on Saturday, February 10th, 2024 at 3:15 p.m. at Nathman Hall, 17530 Provost Street, near Ovation. And I think that's it for the general updates from the Commission for Citizen Involvement, which will take us into the public hearing. And this is for the Community Development Code 2023 Annual Amendments, LU 23-0036. And I'm going to turn it over to, I think, Senior Planner Ellen Davis to lay the ground for us.
I'll first cover the process, and then we'll take it to her hearing. This is a legislative decision, which is generally a policy decision within the discretion of the City Council. The Planning Commission will review the legislative proposal and make a recommendation to the City Council. Although a legislative decision may be discretionary, it must also comply with any applicable statewide law and any statewide planning goal or administrative rule adopted pursuant to ORS Chapter 197. A legislative amendment to the Community Development Code must also comply with the applicable provisions of the Lake Oswego Comprehensive Plan. The public hearing process will begin with a presentation by staff, then testimony will be received from the public. Individuals will be allowed up to 5 minutes. Recognized neighborhood associations, homeowner associations, government agencies, or other incorporated public interest organizations will be allowed up to 10 minutes. These time limits do not include time taken by questions from the Commission or responses to such questions. Testimony by attorneys, representatives, and witnesses on behalf of, or which are part of the presentation by person shall be counted within that person's time limit. Any person in attendance may cede his or her time for testimony to another person, but in no case shall that person's testimony be increased to greater than 10 minutes. At this point, I would ask the Commission members to please declare if you have any financial conflicts of interest you need to declare. Any?
Would this be the time that I announce a potential?
Yes.
Okay, so Rachel Najak, I work at Hacienda Community Development, who will be submitting public testimony tonight through my colleague Kevin Chavez. Given a potential conflict of interest, we don't believe that there's any material financial benefit to the company from this request, but just want to be above board and declare.
Anything else? Okay. All right, with that, then Senior Planner Ellen Davis with the staff report.
All right. Thank you, Commissioners. Good evening. My name is Ellen Davis. I am a Senior Planner for the City. Tonight, we will be working on the public hearing for this commission to decide its recommendation to the City Council on the annual code amendments. Our schedule for tonight will start out with a project schedule overall for the project, a brief discussion of 2 comments that were received earlier today, and then I will only talk about maintenance and policy amendment items that have different options for the commission to choose between for which one to further to the City Council. And I will leave plenty of time for discussion of other items at the end of my presentation. So we'll try to keep this pretty quick. So the project schedule, right now we're in the public hearing phase of the Planning Commission. We'll come back with findings on February 26th, and then hopefully we'll go to the City Council on March 19th. So that's where we are in our process. We did receive 2 comments today, comments Exhibit G1 and G2. The first of those comments proposes adding a property-specific code amendment to the Westlake Grove Overlay District. That is Chapter 50-05005. And I'll note that we did not send out notice for any amendments to any changes within that code section. So if this commission does choose or is interested in opening this code section, we would have to send out a new statewide notice to the Department of Land Conservation Development, interested parties, that sort of thing. So that would be an additional approximately 40 days. So we'd have to continue the hearing and then come back once proper notice of opening that section was given. I will also note that staff doesn't generally recommend project-specific code amendments. Generally, we want our code in our amendments to the code to address broader issues and broader land use types within city. So staff would recommend looking at a more widely applicable solution, such as creating a variance process for the Westlake Grove overlay, which does not currently have a variance process available. And that could allow flexibility throughout the overlay and for a variety of different options and different cases that might come up over time. That process we would recommend would go through proper public outreach through a separate process from the current annual code amendments that we're talking about tonight. Moving on to the second comment, that addressed maintenance item number 16, which I will discuss in more depth later on. The comment expressed concerns. We did reach out to the commenter to try and get more clarity, but didn't get to hear back from them before our meeting tonight. So with all of that being said, I'm going to jump right into our amendments, and I'll just remind you again, I'm not discussing every single amendment tonight, don't worry. I will just focus on the amendments where this commission will need to pick an option, and then we can talk about any other items that you have any questions about at the end. So maintenance item number 12 is the first one that has two different options for this commission. This is addressing the appeal period and the period to submit written evidence into the record for a closed record city council hearing. So at this point, the record is already closed. There shouldn't be any new evidence or new argument entering the record. Staff has proposed 2 business days prior to the city council meeting. And this is because the city council record can be very large by this point in the process, and you can receive very large submissions that staff need to go through that new submission and compare it to the record and see if there's anything new, which can be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. And we need to do that before the commission, and sometimes we need to be able to reach out to the commenter to let them know that there is something new or give them the opportunity to point out where we might have missed it in that large record that already exists. So having those 2 business days, typically council meetings are on Tuesdays, sometimes at 3 p.m., so that would be a Friday at noon date for submittal, so that we would have time to look through everything and talk to the commenter before that hearing. And again, nothing new should be submitted by then, so there's plenty of opportunity to put evidence and argument into the record before this point. So I will move on to our maintenance item number 16. This is a new item. So this was added since our last work session. This talks about duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, which were added into the code during our middle housing code update a couple of years ago. And the legislative intent that you can see in Exhibit F1 shows that the council specifically chose attached units. So the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee actually recommended allowing detached duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, and the city council specifically determined that all of these types of plexes should be attached. Now, to throw a little wrench in there, the Community Development Code has a definition for the term detached, which defines detached as separated by more than 3 feet, eave to eave horizontally. So anything is attached if it is closer than 3 feet apart, eave to eave. There's nothing in the legislative history that indicates that the commission specifically intended to have a 3-foot or 2.99 foot separation allowed between the units. They use the term attached, which more often in common parlance, one thinks of attached sharing a wall or a floor. So the proposed definition that we're proposing to add would further that legislative intent of having a shared, at least 25% of the shared wall or floor between the two units touching. If you don't have a defined percentage, then you could just kind of have corners that would be touching. So in this case, it would have a more specific attachment that looks more like what people often think of when they would think of a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex, instead of that 2.99-foot separation between the eaves. I will mention, however, that we are simultaneously now, a couple of years since the beginning of the work on middle housing, we are looking at increasing flexibility for housing types, increasing housing production. So adding this specificity could be at counter purposes to broader housing production strategies that we are looking at today in a way that things might have changed in the last couple of years. So moving forward with the definition proposed in the packet of code amendments would require a common wall or floor to be shared for all plexes. Not moving forward with that amendment would allow the 2.99-foot separation between eaves on these units to continue. So you could get duplexes that do not share a common wall if we do not adopt the new definition. So those are your two different options as a body.
And Ellen, can I just expand on that a little bit? Because I know the comment that we received, there was concern that we were proposing something that was different than the Middle Housing Committee had discussed. And I just want to point out that before we adopted the Middle Housing Code, triplexes and quadplexes were considered multifamily. That's what they were by definition. And so the definition that we're showing today matches the definition of multifamily. So it's basically keeping that same definition that it did before. Duplexes were previously defined as two units in one building. So, but because you could attach something differently, and if you just say when we adopted the new definition of duplex and new definition of triplex and quadplex, it just says attached units, but there is no definition of attached in the code. There's a definition of detached, which says that it's considered attached if it's less than 3 feet separation. So again, this is very convoluted and kind of hard to explain, but I just wanted you to know where we got the definition that we're proposing, which is of multifamily and also of townhomes, and that makes sure that there is at least some amount of percentage of a wall or ceiling that it's going to be attached. Otherwise, if you just say attached, there's no definition of that, and someone could even consider that to be attached by a corner or an inch. So we want to make sure that there's some amount, a minimum amount required for it to be considered attached. So again, sorry that this is so complicated and convoluted, but certainly if you have more questions, we'll be happy to explain that in more detail.
It's on. Moving on to our next item is the one policy amendment item that still needs some choice by the commission, is the policy amendment item number 1. And we've talked about this pretty extensively at our last couple of work sessions, so I'll try to move through it pretty quickly. So we have unimproved and unopened rights of way in the city. An unimproved right of way is like a dirt road. An unopened right of way is a right of way that is not opened by the city or maintained by the city for vehicular or pedestrian access. For cottage clusters, any cottage cluster or any cottage within the cluster that does not face the courtyard that is within 20 feet of a public right-of-way has to face the public right-of-way, regardless of whether that right-of-way is an unopened right-of-way or an unimproved right-of-way. So a current proposal is to exempt cottages that are facing an unimproved and an unopened right-of-way from that requirement so that they could face towards internal pedestrian circulation within the site instead of having their front doors face an area that does not look like a public right-of-way. Another option is to choose only unopened or only unimproved rights-of-way. Staff recommends either adopting both unopened and unimproved, or at least allowing unopened rights-of-way to be exempted from this standard. The standard wouldn't necessarily lead to an active pedestrian scape, which I think the standard is trying to get at, In this case, you would have a front door that instead of facing internal to the site was facing more of a ravine, a steep topography, often unopened rights of way or unopened due to some sort of physical constraint that are never going to become streets in the future. So I will just put that recommendation out there. But I told you it'd be short and sweet, so those were it for our items. And I will open the floor up for any questions about any of the other maintenance or policy items that I did not explicitly address in that presentation. Any questions?
Just on the very last one we were talking about, should we assume facing, when a structure faces somewhere, that means it's front door?
Yes, that is correct. And I believe that the cottages are also required to have some form of front porch, or is that maybe not?
In certain districts they are, but yeah, basically the front door or front porch.
Okay, so
Front door.
facing means front door.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioners, any other questions?
I have one just kind of curiosity question. On this image, who owns the common courtyard area?
Well, currently, we have some flexibility within our code. It can be owned separately by individual lots within a middle housing land division and hold an easement over it, or it could be owned in a separate ownership, a separate tract.
If I can expand on that. So, yeah, like you could have it as a common easement. The underlying property would be individually owned as part of the lot, but there would be an easement in favor of all of the unit owners, all the cottage owners, that would have the use and enjoyment and obligation to maintain the common courtyard. That's one scenario. So there, the property owner believes that they own to the middle of the courtyard, in that case, subject to the common easement. So when they look at their title report, they would see the whole thing. But it would also have a statement that it's subject to the easement. It's also, you have the benefits. Every property owner would have the benefits of the easement. The other scenario is to put it in a separate tract. So it's not part of any particular lot. It's just a tract, which we use to distinguish a lot, means it's unbuildable. Tract is not a buildable lot. It would be used solely for the purpose of, like any open space tract, it would be solely for the purpose of the common courtyard. It would have covenants that would say, just as an easement does, which would say that the property owners have the right to use the tract, but also the obligation to help maintain it and the obligation and rights to manage it. State law is, gives us, I think, the way I read it, they did not come down hard on one way or the other. So, I mean, the reasonable minds can differ, but I think we have the right to pick which one we want. Okay? Or to have both, or to allow both. Okay, so. Yeah, the net effect is the same, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, my curiosity was that you have these nice little cottages and then the center courtyard just doesn't have the same aesthetic pleasing aspect to it and just kind of detracts from the whole development. So that was just my question, is who maintains this and keeps it looking?
Each of the property owners would have an obligation to maintain it under either scenario.
Does option one under the screen provide the greatest flexibility for cottage developers to, develop cottages and build them?
That is correct. I cannot think of any unimproved roads right off the top of my head. I can think of a number of unopened roads. We just kind of, or I staff through that in case there is an unimproved right-of-way that we're not thinking of, to make sure that we don't accidentally say that a cottage has to face a dirt road that we weren't even contemplating when we were looking at this amendment.
So what would be the arguments against going with option one, which from a baseline provides the greatest flexibility for cottage clusters to get developed?
I believe at an earlier work session that there was a question about whether one of unopened or unimproved right-of-ways would be more likely to be developed in the future. And I do believe that an unimproved right-of-way would be more likely to be developed in the future as opposed to a completely unopened right-of-way. As I mentioned, unopened rights-of-way really typically you find in areas of the city where there's a steep topography or some other natural feature that would prevent the road from being put in, which is why a road has never been put in. If there is an unimproved right-of-way that's more of just a dirt road, then that at least would have already kind of established this is where this pathway is, this is where this roadway is, in a way that it might be more likely to be developed in the future.
So if we took, not we, city council took option one, and made an exemption, and then a developer sort of built facing the unimproved portion, because that's now, I guess, allowed, that might foreclose that unimproved plot from being developed later on?
No, actually quite the opposite.
Okay.
So right now, a developer on a cottage cluster on a site that abutted an unimproved roadway would be required for any units that do not face the common courtyard that are within 20 feet of the property line along the dirt road to face the dirt road. So it has nothing to do with whether or not the dirt road gets developed in the future. It's just requiring that the front doors of at least some of the cottages have to face the dirt road.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the commission or the commissioners?
Yeah, I keep trying to think about this attached, detached middle housing and just trying to think through really like the pros and the cons of allowing that little strip of space in between the units. I haven't thought up anything yet, but if anyone else has opinions to share, I'd be curious.
I will mention one thing. Our Metro Region DLCD rep did mention to me that Oregon City specifically allowed detached units with the idea that that might allow, if there's already a unit on the site, that might add more flexibility and the ability to site new units without affecting the existing unit on a site. They did specifically say that they're not sure if that has actually borne merit or not, but that was at least what they mentioned was a reason for leaving detached plexes allowed within Oregon City. So I don't know if that's bearing out, if that's happening or not, or leading to more retention of existing structures.
Do you mind if I?
Oh, yes, certainly.
Sorry, I was on the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee, so just a little bit of insight. I think a lot of the concern or just the initial direction that we got from council on this was related to aesthetic sort of concerns that if there was separation, they might look more like single-family homes. So I think it's basically aesthetic, sort of concerns, and I think there's also kind of interesting logic with the way that we define detached, where we consider things less than 3 feet, 3 feet or more to be detached. So there's kind of a logic to that as well, just saying it's kind of marginal. So there's one sort of argument that says this is kind of marginal aesthetically, we don't even notice. Another rationale that says we do notice aesthetically and we don't want that small separation.
I don't want to get really into deliberating too much yet, because I know we're not really supposed to be doing that now, but I'm, to answer your question, I'm having a hard time coming up also with a good reason to allow 3 feet or less, mainly because of the word less. You can actually build these things closer than 3 feet, which I don't see any sort of redeeming quality to that. It creates spaces that are hard to clean, that are dark. I think it has some unintended consequences. So, but anyway, again, sorry. I'll save that for deliberation more.
Questions? Any other questions, commissioners? Is this the point in time where we should allow public testimony? Yes. Okay. I think we have Christina, is it?
I have Carol Ockert, remote.
Hear me? And can you see me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Before I start, I just wanted to note that I submitted a request to be called twice this evening to provide testimony for two distinct organizations. And so when I go through my first presentation, I can check back in with you and see if you want me to proceed or step back and be called later again. Thank you. I will need to share my screen this evening to show a PowerPoint presentation.
Ms.
So
Ockert, are
if
you
it's-
currently testifying for yourself or for the other entity?
Again, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Carol Ockert, and I'm representing at the moment the Neighborhood Chairs Committee.
That's 5 minutes.
I'm sorry, I thought that would be 10 minutes for an organization.
I don't believe they are a recognized neighborhood association themselves, nor are they a public interest incorporated entity, homeowners association.
Gosh,
Chair can expand the time, but that's not in the list.
I'm sorry, I haven't had that happen to me before. I've always been noted that time as if I were any other organization the city would recognize. So I will do my best to go as quickly as possible, and I'm sorry that that's the way that it's going to be. Right,
Chair
moving
can
along.
expand the time. I'm just saying that's what the list was. And
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hawker. Go ahead and take the time you need for your PowerPoint. We appreciate you showing up here and putting together the efforts in the presentation.
Thanks, and I have kept them as short as I could. So this evening, I will cover two topics, and the first one will be common courtyards with cottage clusters, and the second will be item 16M, attached detached middle housing. I introduced the common courtyard concern during your December 11th work session. Staff has not included this item, but staff has told me that you can still add it this evening. During the middle housing code process, the community was shown this picture and similar images of cottage clusters, small cottages around a common courtyard. What we believed when we were told the word common was a shared amenity held in common ownership, a place for everybody in the development where neighbors could picnic, kids could play, pets could toilet and exercise. Staff says developers can sell the common courtyard to one or some of the units in a cottage cluster. The image you're looking at is a proposed cottage cluster development in Lake Oswego, and who owns the common courtyard? Right here. And it's Unit 3 would own half, and Unit 4 would own the other half of the common courtyard. I'm showing you another proposed cottage cluster development in Lake Oswego with 8 units. And in this example, who does and who doesn't own a piece of the common courtyard? Well, it looks like units H, E, and A don't own a part of the common courtyard. Are you starting to understand the mess? Well, the people who attended a recent neighborhood general meeting get it. To quote the neighborhood chair, everyone attending agreed not having common ownership will invite disaster because if a person thinks it is their front yard, they will treat a common courtyard like their front yard and not take kindly to other neighbors using that space. And once that happens, problems will begin. Who owns the common courtyard? Well, HOA owned or owner easement. Staff says the current approach with owner will be to set up easements in each individual deed where a unit owns all or part of the courtyard under the owner easement model. The problem with that approach, owners believe that it is their yard. They're more likely to see fences go up, and with easements, it will be the city's responsibility to enforce and resolve disputes, starting with a call to the city and a demand to send out the code enforcement officer. And how about owner liability coverage? But with the common courtyard held in a separate tract by the HOA, clearly open for all to use, it's the HOA's responsibility to sort out any disputes, not the city. and staff has confirmed it is legal to require common courtyards must be held by a HOA in a separate tract, as our Deputy City Attorney explained this evening. The Planning Commission should include a common courtyard amendment in the 2024 annual code updates. Lake Oswego's citizen involvement guidelines state the Planning Commission, under item 2, will promote general public input on formulation of alternatives prior to the proposal of policies and recommendations. And item 5, analyze citizen neighborhood association and staff input from a citywide point of view and recommend appropriate measures to council. The NCC, the Neighborhood Chairs Committee, asks your support to adopt code to prohibit all or a portion of the common courtyard from being sold to individual unit owners. The common courtyard must be in a tract held in common ownership. Neighborhood associations are an officially recognized channel for citizen participation in land use planning in Lake Oswego, and these neighborhood representatives unanimously supported the motion that you see on the screen at our January 27th meeting. Now let's look at attached and detached middle housing. On the screen is what we were shown. Here you see attached triplex front and back, attached triplex side by side, a stacked quadplex, and then here you see a figure that shows distinctly they're detached in this quadplex. So what we're seeing in these units is attached equals common wall. Some cons of allowing detached units: lots with multiple detached structures of a similar size are uncommon today, so they could be perceived as incompatible with existing neighborhood character. Detached housing is generally less energy efficient than attached housing. These were comments presented by staff during the HB 2001 process. And one of the biggest comments from the neighborhood survey was the community fit. So it all comes down to the definition of detached, which was meant to be between a house and an accessory structure of 3 feet or more. Here you see the house, here you see the accessory garage structure. And it's really about, it was about one lot, one subject structure, and a secondary garage accessory structure. To detach the garage could provide a new house being built more floor area or more lot coverage. So the city has a code interpretation log, and interpretations of code text are sometimes necessary by staff. This interpretation log collects some of the staff interpretations, subject to revision or rescission for a number of reasons, like a change of law, for example, HB 2001. Here are some examples from that code, and you can see that it talks about issues with flag lots, elevated driveways, and even includes a definition of detached needing clarification in the I-Code in 2013. And clearly, it needs clarification again. The community said preserve neighborhood character. The council said preserve neighborhood character. Staff promoted belief that the common wall equaled attached. Staff put the choice to council, attached or detached middle housing, and council directed attached. The Neighborhood Chairs Committee supports the council directive. Attached means physically attached, common wall and structures. And should I now continue to my next presentation for the Fan Forest Hills Neighborhood Association, or I can release my shared screen and you can call someone else?
Unless there's any questions, Ms. Awkward, thank you. I would say go on to your next presentation on behalf of, sorry, I missed who you're in your capacity for at that moment.
Okay, let me bring that up. And in this presentation, it's a very short presentation, and I will be representing the Fan Forest Hills Neighborhood Association.
Thank you.
Fan Forest Hills is a neighborhood that has been inclusive of many housing types. I have represented my neighborhood association as a land use liaison in numerous pre-application meetings for duplexes, townhomes, and mid to large scale residential condominium and multifamily residential developments. We understand good code. We work diligently to make sure it is appropriately applied. We want good results for the city. Sometimes there are code misinterpretations, and we seek to clarify and resolve. That is what you are hearing tonight when we talk about the situation with both common courtyard ownership and attached middle housing. When we reviewed the development plans on the screen before you, both plans that are proposed for developments in the Fan Forest Hills neighborhood, we understood the proposals did not match intention. There was a misapplication of code as a result of changes brought about by the HB 2001 code process and Senate Bill 458. Clear code understanding is the goal for staff, developers, and the community. And we want middle housing to be a good housing choice in our city. That means it needs to be done well. That's why PC, City Council, and the community at large spent multiple hours working on middle housing code. Allowing the common courtyard to be divvied up by hodgepodge and sold off to some units is the beginning of poorly functioning middle housing. Someone who paid more for their unit because they have a lot where they own the entire common courtyard may not take well to intensive use of that courtyard by their neighbors in other units who paid less, even if there is an easement. This sets up a middle housing mess. The detached code definition debacle was a code oops. That definition was written well before HB 2001 and before Senate Bill 458 that allowed property lines to draw divisions outside of land use code for the sole purpose of selling the properties. Before that, we had zero lot line code, duplex code, and multifamily code that followed the common wall, common understanding, and produced reliable, good development, as you have seen in many of my slides tonight. The townhome definition has worked to produce good townhome developments in Lake Oswego, and here I emphasize that our townhome code produced good townhomes, which are consequentially different from duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. They're a different animal entirely. So I have input from the Fan Forest Hills Board. It's a board comprised of 13 members. Some are newer to the city, some have been longtime city residents. There's a wide age range, retired folks and parents of very young children up through high school. Fan Forest Hills has a wide variety of housing types, and we've had them for well over 25 years. We understand the variety of middle housing types. We have welcomed many housing types into our neighborhood. So let's make code clear and easy to understand. Put common courtyard fix into the 2024 annual code updates. Common courtyard means common ownership, and attached means physically attached for 100% of the common wall for middle housing. Thanks very much. And if you have any questions, I'll unshare my screen. And thank you for your time this evening. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Agar. We really appreciate your time as well coming here. Any questions from the commission? Okay. Thank you again.
I do have one comment, or a representation was made on HOAs, that what I said was permissible. I want to be clear. We do not require, whether it's an easement or whether it's a tract on the common courtyard, an HOA is not required. The city would not require an HOA. The question is, well, how would you manage it? You can impose easement conditions, covenant conditions, the same thing, which bind the property owner directly And then each property owner would participate in the management of that. How they participate in that, they would have to decide. They could meet once a year to talk about it. They could have an HOA and elect officers to do it. I mean, that's an external entity that they would choose to decide. So while I'm saying that each of the property owners would have to manage the property, how they do that, what entity format they use, is up to them. We cannot, I don't know why we would not mandate an HOA, and I think there's some argument under the middle housing arguments whether we even could. But so.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. Christina, do we have another public testimony?
Okay, we have Kevin Chavez in person.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Chavez. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Good evening. Sounds like this is on.
Great.
Let me know when I can begin. Just go for it. All right. Well, my name is Kevin Chavez. I represent Hacienda CDC. I'm a project manager of the upcoming Lake Grove Affordable Housing Development. Tonight, I am providing comment over the Community Development Code 2023 cycle annual amendments. In particular, I'm providing comment over the code requirement, which requires developers or developments to provide shared driveway and parking lot access with neighboring properties in the West Lake Grove office commercial zoned space. I did submit a letter. I'm not sure if anybody had a chance to review it or if it's in your packet. I certainly hope so. Yeah, great. Well, I do want to make some corrections to that letter. While initially we had hoped to propose code amendments for the 2023 cycle, it did come to our understanding that the timing really isn't appropriate just because of the process and where you all are in. Sounds like you've already had several workshops, so I apologize for the timing of this request, but we do kindly still ask that you consider this for the next upcoming cycle, as it would certainly increase parking availability for future developments in low-income housing, but also provide safety for traffic circulation between commercial and residential spaces. And that is all I have. So thank you for your time, and hope you have a good evening. Actually, if there's any questions, yeah?
Thank you, Mr. Chavez, for your time. Appreciate it. We do have the packet.
Perfect.
So it's here. We got that. Any questions from any commissioners? We got one.
So the shared parking in question, I'm assuming that's concerning the property to the west?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, because everywhere else you're bounded by streets, it looks
Right.
like.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Christina, any additional public comments? Testimony?
Have Ken Allen remotely.
Hi there, good evening.
Hi, Mr. Allen. How are you? Thank you for coming.
Doing good, thank you. I'm going to turn my backlight off here.
Sure. Thank you for coming. If you could just state your name and what capacity you're here, and if you're representing an entity or not, and then is it 5 minutes testimony?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Ken Allen. I reside up in the Palisades neighborhood. I represent myself as a private citizen of Lake Oswego and Oregon native. Couple quick points. I'm the friendly developer up for the Stafford Road project right across from Lusher Farms, right in the amenity Mecca Center for Lake Oswego. So I'm excited to take that project on. We are contemplating middle housing for that project there, the old church that's there, the C3 church and the Bethlehem preschool. And I agree with staff. I think we're going in the right direction. I think it's common that when code gets put in place, specifically with middle housing, that 6 months to a year later here, we're amending just to bring clarity. And the practical view that we have on the two topics that we're talking about tonight, and I think I agree with staff fully, but I'm looking for maximum flexibility because as a developer, as we just heard from project manager from Hacienda, we're looking for viability in all of our projects because economic viability is paramount. Otherwise, we don't get to build anything. Specifically to cottage clusters, they're already handicapped a little bit because of the constraint of how many square feet we can do on the first floor, and then a max of 1,200 square feet, average between 8 units. So specifically to the courtyard, we would buy, I think, like staff is suggesting, and I think they've done a great job in that looking at the maximum flexibility would be both aspects of this, either private easements and or singular tracts like we do in a larger subdivision, which is very common. And I think the city attorney would agree that in the end, you get the net effect of the same physical use of it. You can constrain each property owner with an easement to keep it open, no fences, things like that. Or if you do a tract, you can, of course, both can be maintained by an HOA or a private contract with landscapers, things like that. So net effect, we want maximum flexibility with both options there, I think is the direction that I would choose to go as a practical developer. The other thing on that is, and not to get into the weeds on it, but with middle housing, you have a parent lot, and I'm sure you guys have all been down this road, but parent lot is the big lot. And at Stafford Road, we have 15,000 foot lots. We're narrowing those down to a child lot, which might be 4 townhomes or a triplex or a duplex, or in this case, the cottage cluster. So if we do the easements, that may help, quite frankly, with the figuring of the lines to make sure we can still fit within, 8 units or 6 units or whatever we can in a parent lot. And then the common wall situation, I don't know, common wall has been around for a long, long time. So I think I like the idea that we defined what attached is because, and I have 2 pros or maybe 1 pro. Why would you want to detach them 3 feet or whatever you want to call that, attached but 3 feet apart? First off, the pro the only one I can think of is you're getting more air quality in between the units, which would lead to better sound quality or sound barrier. That's probably the only thing. The downside is you're doubling your siding, you're doubling your windows, you're creating this weird, not private. So we've always considered the attached meaning a common wall construction like you'd see in multifamily or a triplex or duplex. I think 25% is minimum. I'm not an advocate of 100% because aesthetically we like to offset the units so they could go forward and backward, and garages could be fore and aft, and front porches. So maybe maximum 50%, but if you do 100%, all you're doing is lining up your facades and your garages. And to Eric Olson's point, it is truly an aesthetics question on the common wall. So we want them to look as nice as they can, and we would work within the footprint of the single family detached constraints that we have, and floor area ratios and lot coverage. So I think we could end up with some beautiful product there. But common wall is the way to go, in my opinion. And happy to take some questions or just continue to listen. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Really appreciate your time and your testimony today. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Allen? Okay. Thank you again. Christina, do we have any other? That's the end? Okay. That's the end of the public testimony. A little bit hesitant on the next step of the process here. I think we will open up to deliberation.
Questions for staff from that, and then proceed to deliberation. And perhaps Ellen can kind of guide you through to make sure we hit all of the options that the commission needs to get.
Can I jump in and ask a question, Ellen, before we do that, just to make sure I understand? Several people have talked about the common courtyard ownership issue. Is that In our, that was not an item in our packet, right?
No, that
Okay.
is correct. It was not an item in your packet.
Not to disregard it, obviously we take it into account and we should discuss it, but just want to make sure. Okay, thank you.
If you wanted to take that up, we would need to renotice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right. So the items that you have that we have questions on, for you are, maintenance item number 12, which was, we had put in the packet, we'd kind of highlighted 2 business days, but we did highlight the option to have 1 business day prior to the city council meeting. So that was an option. But staff does recommend 2 business days. So we just wanted to clarify that when the commission is deliberating and taking your votes. So that'd be maintenance item number 12. Number 16 was the new one we added tonight. So that does have the option of requiring a shared common wall or floor. The staff proposed language included a 25% minimum shared common wall or floor area. Or continue to allow the existing code, which does allow up to a 2.99 foot separation between units.
I just want to clarify, we did not add that tonight.
No.
It's added since your last work session, but it was in the notice.
Properly
So I
noticed.
just want to clarify that.
Yes, that is correct. And for policy amendment item number 1, there are the options to look at exempting cottages from facing unimproved and unopened right-of-way, or just picking one of those options. So those were the 3 main topics that we were asking about.
And Mr. Chair, this always arises when we have these bundled amendments. You'll be discussing them one by one. My suggestion is you take a straw poll, so we have from each one, so the council would know if there's any split in the commission and what the reasons are. The minutes will reflect that, not the findings. And when you get all done, then you're recommending a package. Okay, so whole shebang, unless there's a motion to split some off and that sort of thing. But if the motion is to move forward the recommendation, then each commissioner needs to decide whether they are on the whole supportive of the package. They may have their differences, and that would be reflected in the minutes, or whether they feel so strongly about one or more items that they just can't vote for the whole package and would vote opposed to the package.
Thank you, Mr. Boone.
Sorry, Chair. I would just also add that you, of course, had 2 additional amendments that were proposed by the public that, of course, were not in our presentation, so I don't want you to forget to discuss those. And certainly if you have any questions about those, we'd be happy to address them as well. And that would be the courtyard issue and the hacienda code amendment issue.
So I guess my question to you is the courtyard aspect. What's the next steps with that to actually get it into some type of an amendment?
Well, first of all, we would need to renotice. So you'd need to continue the hearing so that we could renotice that, because that was not part of the
Right,
notice of the
understand.
amendments. The reason why it wasn't included by staff, I mean, it was brought up to us not that long ago, is that, first of all, we had already gone through study sessions with the Planning Commission, so we didn't want to add something in at the end. And then also, we didn't know we didn't hear the other side of this. We didn't have time to look at it and say, how would this potentially affect the flexibility from a builder developer's perspective? And obviously, you did hear from someone tonight, coincidentally, so it was good to get both sides of it. But we wanted to make sure it was properly vetted before we put something like this forward. So if you chose not to take it up tonight, we would consider it in the next round of amendments. But again, if you wanted to take it up, we would need to renotice and continue this hearing.
And when would the next round of amendments be?
Well, they're done yearly, so it would be in the
year.
next year. So it would take a while to get forward, but we would probably start at late spring, I would estimate.
So my only comment on that is it seems like I mean, she made a very good presentation tonight, as she did the last time she was here.
Yeah.
And it just seems like something ripe for challenges. And I think seeing something like this now and hearing what could go wrong between different homeowners and the kind of questioning of who owns what, it'd be great to try and solve that now as opposed to wait a full year to get to it.
I wonder if
Well, that's
there's
your choice, and you can
I
deliberate
wonder
on that.
though, is there a third option, which would be, I think it's something that has enough substance that can we propose exploring it as a separate thing? So it's not part of a package of code amendments, it's actually more of something we study, you know, in the near term. Because I think there's, you know, the question of whether these developments should go along the lines of more of a traditional cottage housing development that, you know, we know of as this cluster of houses that share a common courtyard, versus a couple of these proposals that I saw, which look nothing more than a subdivision without roads almost, because it's just taking all the land and just chopping it up into single-family houses, and that's not what a cottage cluster is, I don't think. And so I think it's something that we need to study it more closely, because I think people might be missing the point.
I guess I would just add, there are very prescriptive common courtyard requirements within the sort of cottage cluster regulations that were adopted by the state of Oregon under and their minimum compliance provisions, Division 46. Those are very prescriptive, and in terms of the layout of what you're seeing, nothing would be changed. The configuration is something that we're required to allow under state law, more or less. What we're talking about is whether or not the common courtyard, as we're required to allow it, should be separately owned, or if it can be owned by multiple entities.
Well, and I think that's the question at hand, because I don't think anybody intended what I saw, which was these 7 lots that basically chopped up the courtyard. I mean, I don't think that's the intention.
I think with SB 458 that, you know, most cities have interpreted that to be.
So they allow that.
Yeah, that the easement was designed to, you know, sort of, you know, control those concerns, and nobody's really taken a strong stance that we're aware of on requiring it to be a separate tract. So we didn't want to wade too far into those waters for fear of kind of getting sort of a reaction from the opposite side of things, I suppose, and sort of setting a precedent within the city that hadn't been set yet. So
I guess, I would say that functionally, they are the same. The concept that the common area would be independently owned by the property owners that happen to abut it, yes, they would own the underlying land, but it's subject to an easement, and each property owner would have an undivided, non-exclusive easement of use and benefit and obligation through the easements to maintain those. So they have a right to enter. I mean, legally on paper, they're the same. I will say that we have had 2 instances in which property lines make a difference from people's perception. I mean, I acknowledge that. And in both instances, I think we're successful in saying, but it is subject to the easement. You have to recognize the easement. So, you know, that we have won those. At least we went to trial on one case on that, and the other one was dispute with the owner, and I think that's been resolved. But yes, people think they own to the property line, but that's because they don't read their title report to say, but it's an easement. And it would be designed, and I mean, there would be no line down the middle of the grass, okay? So it's perception is, you know, would it certainly appear that.
Mr. Boone, I think the testimony brought up a tax angle. Could you speak to that?
Well, I know people think that I'm going to pay more tax if my property is larger, even though it's subject to an easement, okay? The question from an assessor's point of view is, what would a knowledgeable buyer pay for the property? And if a knowledgeable buyer knows that they have the exclusive use up to, but for the last 10 feet, and then there's an easement that gives everybody the right, including themselves, the right to have beneficial use to that, well, the knowledgeable buyer would say, I'm not going to value the per square foot at the same price for the entire lot, because I don't have exclusive use of that. So, and assessors look to the impacts of the easement upon the market value. That's a common, you can have pretty prescriptive easements. If I can, the city owns the Glenmore Greenway. That's kind of a linear piece of property. There's a house in the middle of the greenway, and we have 2 easements 30 feet wide on both sides in order to allow public passage. And I'm sure the property owner would say to the assessor, those 30-foot easements on either side, which run basically from a little bit of the side of the house, but to the property line, those substantially affect the value of the property. So that gets taken into account.
When is the developer the one that's creating, when they acquire the lot and then they submit the plans to do a college cluster, they decide at that time whether, as part of partition, I don't know the right word, but partition, that they're going to grant easements on all the different tracts of land? It's the developer's choice at that moment?
Sorry, it is the developer's choice, but it's a requirement under Senate Bill 458 that an easement be created for the common sort of access and maintenance, and it's all sort of spelled out in state law specific provisions. This is actually something we don't have in our code currently within the city of Lake Oswego. We're basically directly implementing state statute that governs middle housing land divisions. So yeah, there's very specific sort of prescriptive requirements in that we're attempting to implement here in the city. For the most part, those are almost exclusively about easements related to access and utilities in the common courtyard. So it's really, the bulk of those applications is kind of related to those concerns. And it's, again, there's no prescriptive sort of, it has to be a separate track, it has to be an easement, or it does have to be an easement, but, there's no prescription of, it needs to be on a separate tract, or it could be on sort of a, culmination of parcels, just that the easement has to allow for access.
To the
in
entire
either case, yeah.
To the entire common courtyard.
Yes, that's right.
So I guess I'm a little bit confused. Is the testimony that's now advocating for common ownership of that instead of one tract can technically own the courtyard, but it's subject to the easement for everyone else?
I think that's a good point. That doesn't, if it's a separate tract, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's commonly owned.
Well,
It needs to have an easement for common access, but.
It would be a tract, and each of the property owners would have an undivided interest in the tract with an obligation to maintain it and rights of benefit to it. Or if it's an easement, each of the property owners would have an undivided interest. Right. So from the lawyer's perspective, it's
the same.
You can do the same thing. There is public perception issues, obviously.
And I will actually take a step back and note that cottage clusters are not required to go through a middle housing land division and have separate ownership. They could be a singular lot that is not divided for ownership purposes, just one big lot owned by one individual entity, whatever the case may be. So it is not required to divide a cottage courtyard or a cottage cluster in any way, shape, or form. One could apply for building permits for separate cottages and then apply for a middle housing land division to separate ownership for each cottage to have its own lot after all of the cottages are constructed. So they could choose not to divide the land at all also.
Okay, thank you. So I think the question here for the commission is, do we want to move forward with what's in front of us and sort of leave this, as I think Ms. Namanalu said, it'll be on their agenda and we'll figure out whether to address it in 2025 code amendments, or do we want to make a recommendation, I guess, that we continue this hearing and sort of push the schedule out for all of the other amendments to then include this and have it properly noticed, et cetera? That's the question I think is in front of us right now, unless anyone sees it differently. And if nobody sees it differently, I'd take a straw poll on how we feel about it.
Well, my opinion is we shouldn't hold up this set of amendments for this issue.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. You're saying hold it. Is that, I didn't.
No, I say don't hold it.
Yeah.
Don't hold these amendments in order to solve that.
I'm suggesting holding everything to put a complete package together, since this issue seems to be one that's kind of murky, and it's even confusing to us trying to listen to both sides. So I would say clarify it in more detail before we move forward with the whole package.
Miles, Jim? Jessica?
I don't have an opinion.
Yeah, I see both sides where, as you were saying, Commissioner Shoney, that a year's a long time to wait, and these things are getting built and they're becoming increasingly popular in the development community. So it could come back and bite us if we put it off another year. But also I see your point as well, that we don't want to hold up all this other good work that we're trying to do for the code. So I'm undecided.
Okay. Got one undecided.
Mr. Chair?
I'm in favor of, oh, yes.
I'm advised that Ken Allen would like to provide further comment. You'd have to reopen the testimony part of the hearing if you wish to do so, or you can, the time has expired and you can proceed with deliberation. If you wish to do so, your items, basically you're making a recommendation to City Council, and Mr. Allen would have an opportunity to make fresh comments before the City Council.
Can we finish our straw poll and then go to Mr. Allen and open up his testimony?
Yeah, you have to open up for everybody, but the question is, what does he want to talk about? I don't know. So,
Mr. Allen, can you give us 1 second? We're going to finish our straw poll and then we will come back to you. I can't tell if he's on, but Jim, I was going to say I'm in favor of moving forward, even though this is an issue that's clearly at the forefront of the community's mind. I would rather not hold up the work of the amendments that have been done.
I don't want to like belittle the issue, but I mean the main reason I want to move forward is that this wasn't in this package originally, and we're all the way to public hearing, and it seems strange to all of a sudden add something and then postpone it. That's the main reason for my position.
Jim, any comments?
I agree with you.
Eric's raising his hand.
This year, we're doing a lot of work on middle housing and housing production strategies, so there will be ample opportunities to talk about some of these details further down the road with that project as well, so that's another option.
Okay. So my very informal results are we have 3 in favor of moving on with it, 2 sort of undecided, and then Mr. Scanoni against moving forward. So Mr. Allen, are you still on with us? He's still showing up on the screen, Christina?
Yes. Yeah, thank you for allowing me access back in. I actually, it's a 2-part comment. What's the ramification if you give new notice? I mean, are we talking 60, 90 days and then it's a complete package, or what kind of timing? That's my first question. And then maybe a follow-on is, what's the ramification or the downside? Because unintentional consequences of all this is really what's looming over the whole middle housing thing. We just don't know. Multiple cities I work with, multiple planners, a lot of city council, the planning commission. I respect everything you guys are doing, and even my own staff and myself. It's like, it's, Happy Valley, Tualatin, Hillsborough, we're all interpreting it differently. And until we see progress, and I think, some of the people have noted that this is becoming more popular. I mean, I'm in 4 or 5 neighborhood groups right now, and everybody wants cottage clusters, and we don't have the answers for it. So, specifically to cottage clusters, the point the city attorney is making, the end use of the central green, in effect, there's 2 to 3 ways to get that done. The net effect is it looks and feels the same if you write it properly. So whether, HOA is mowing it, or we're all chipping in, or individuals, have to maintain their section, which wouldn't be, proper. But Anyway, my two questions are, what kind of timing would it take to just add this to it? And then what's the ramifications if you guys choose to go on and then address this later? What's the downside of that? Maybe that's what we need to be thinking about. And that was all. Sorry, it was a little long-winded there.
Thank you. I don't know the timing.
Well, okay, you want to?
Notice would require approximately 40 days. It's a minimum 35 days, as noted, at least in the sheet that I was given for due dates for sending out that notice to DLCD and et cetera.
So we're talking, 60 to 90 days to deliberate on it a little bit more. Does that help the community at large, or does it, and I hate to hold up fellow developers or builders, that's not my intent. It's just to make it more clear so that we can get our marching orders on how to make things better in the city. So then what my follow-on question, I think you guys heard it earlier, is what is the ramification of just pushing it through now and addressing it again in a year from now and amend it then? What's the downside, I guess, or the potential?
Again, I don't want to minimize resident concerns. I think it makes sense that people are concerned about like the ownership piece and sort of think that that could lead to certain assumptions about that being used in a certain way regardless of an easement. That's, sort of an assumption that, certain things could transpire. We still don't have a cottage cluster developed in the city of Lake Oswego. The one of them that's being proposed is proposing this configuration. I think the sort of short-term ramifications of changing this right now could be that there would be simply another relatively minor, but another barrier to essentially the creation of separate units for purchase and sale within a cottage cluster. So we don't have very many data points here, but we do have this one proposal that they're proposing this, and it seems to work for them. So I think we could sort of be impacting that project in some way by making a decision on this.
So nobody's submitted a building permit yet for any of these?
Well, we do not have a middle housing land division yet, but we have a building permit in for a cottage cluster right now.
I guess my point is that we haven't seen it on the ground, and we don't know, nobody's seen kind of what this common courtyard will look like and sort of how things will play out on the ground in terms of the sense of who belongs to that space or who that space belongs to kind of questions. So yeah, we haven't seen it yet to even know whether to sort of respond like this.
Mr. Chair, you reopen the hearing. I understand Carol Ockert has additional testimony.
Ms. Ockert, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay, thank
you have an
you.
additional testimony?
I just wanted to make a brief comment to let you know that I do take very seriously working within a process. And I want you to know that I made my first email contact to staff on the common courtyard concern on the 11th of September of 2023. And I followed up with the vice chair of the neighborhood chairs committee and myself meeting with staff on October 27th and met again with staff, then presented at your work session on December 11th, and then met again with staff on January 23rd. So I have made numerous reaching out, trying to get this to be taken as a reasonably important, inclusive process. And so something that I think if you understand how genuine we have been in our efforts and how much time has elapsed since our first contact in September, I think that's something that you might want to just be aware of. So thanks for letting me explain that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Ockert. Appreciate it. Okay. So we had a straw poll. We opened testimony back up. We heard a couple more comments. We've closed it. I guess to get us back on track, because we have other things to do, I think we should make a sort of a recommendation on this now. And the count was 3 of us, I think, believe that we should leave this with staff and have it addressed either individually or with city council or in next year's amendments. But point being is not open it up and redo the hearing here. I think two were on the fence, if I could use the pun, and then Mr. Scanoni was objecting. So unless anyone's opinion has changed, I think that should be our recommendation with the 3, 2, and 1. Okay. Ms. Davis, is that clear? We're moving forward with the amendments in front of us. Okay. I had a question for all of the other items, not the ones that are issues, item 12, item 16, and policy 1. All the other ones, we just assume the way it's drafted, they will move forward and be recommended. We don't need to discuss them or anything. Unless anyone wants. Okay, I think we should just separate the ones that are at issue that they're asking us for a question, which is, item 12, item 16, and then the policy 1. Does anyone have any comments on the other ones up here from the commission? Okay, let's assume that. All right, so let's take them in order. Item 12, the appeals process. Leave the record, it was make, the submission 2 days before, 2 business days. Do a straw poll again. It's 2 versus 1, I think, is really the question in front of us. We'll go down the line. Mr. Scanoni?
No comment, either way.
Okay. Jack?
I think we should give 2 if staff is saying they need to. The amount of work they have to do will only increase as the years go by.
Yep, I agree. I have the same opinion. We give it to staff.
Agreed.
I agree. I think I would have a soft opinion leaning toward 1, just in the interest of gradual change. Adding another day is a big difference from what there is already. And, in balancing the interest of, allowing people to get in that last minute testimony with, allowing staff time, I wouldn't say that I think this is a matter of life and death, but that's the way I would lean.
Thanks, Commissioner Rigby. Okay, I'll move on to we should get all the straw polls, and then at the end, we'll make our recommendation, right? Okay, item 16, which was the attached, detached definition. We'll do a reverse order, Mr. Rigby?
I would be in favor of moving forward with the proposed changes. I think this looks like a real housekeeping matter of the kind that belongs on that list. Clarifying, something that everyone would think, by reading it, would know what would happen there. I read the testimony that we got, and it sounded to me like the person thought that maybe the changes we were making would be the opposite of what they are. It looks like this person, Ms. Myers, is in favor of making sure that the units are attached in the common sense usage of that word, and the proposed changes would do that. So that's what I think we should do.
So you're in favor of, I think it's option 1 written in the memo, which is clarify. Make a code amendment change to clarify that.
Make the change.
Yeah. Jim?
I'm not in favor of making the change.
Okay.
I'm not sure what option 1 is. What I'm in favor of is having a common wall with at least 25% attachment.
I think that would be option 1.
So that is option 1. Okay, I for some reason I wasn't following that. So yes, common wall.
Okay, I'd say I'm with Jim. I think not making the change and leaving it. I think if you read the option 2, talks about sort of punting, because more flexibility should lead to more housing, which is the overall goal. And so I think option 2 is sort of punting to see how City Council wants to address this later on, to see if they want to clarify that attached means an actual attached. So I'm with Jim on option 2. Not making the change.
I am for option 1 from the developer side, practicality. I don't think that there's I don't see much reason to do the little skinny gap between.
Option 1.
Okay, I think that was 4-2 in favor of option 1. And let's go on to policy amendment number 1, which is the, yeah, thank you. The options for the exempting the cottages facing unimproved and unopened, or choosing only unopened or only unimproved right away. Anybody have a, I'll go first. I think 1 gives us the most flexibility. I'm going that way.
I agree.
I'm in favor of option 1.
I think to me, this is another, not the end of the world thing, but I do think it would be useful to look at, why the requirement of having them facing a certain way is there at all. And, I think it's to, make sure that there isn't just a bunch of blank siding facing a street. And so I would lean on the side of going for just unopened, with the thinking that, in the future, an unimproved, say, dirt road, gravel road could be improved, and that could result in having a bunch of siding facing the street.
I noticed, I just realized I left out the comment, the submission from Mr. Chavez about the other one that's not on the agenda. And I guess I want to make sure we give that the due attention that it deserves. Although I'll say I'm in favor of not opening the hearing up or putting it in. And I think putting it off to, if to be addressed, then addressed in the 2025 amendments. Does anyone have a difference of opinion?
I agree.
Are we done with the other?
Yeah, I think those are the
policy
3.
amendment one? Oh, okay.
Go.
I'll recuse.
Okay. Oh, okay. Mr. Sconey.
Yeah, I agree.
Jim? Any comment on the one that's not on the agenda with the West Lake Grove? Okay. Okay, so we'll count that one out.
I have a question for Mr. Boone. Is that technically in our purview, that issue about connected parking, access, and all that is?
Yeah, the code certainly in some zones has dealt with that, or if you're going to remove that requirement.
I know as a planning commission, we looked at this site, but I know a lot of times that's often goes to development review, so I wasn't sure whether.
We need authorization, I think. I can't remember, we're trying to eliminate it or trying to include it?
They're trying to eliminate the
cross
Westlake Grove
access.
Design District has an internal circulation plan that's required for all the lots. And they want to remove that requirement because they're doing multifamily and it connects to a commercial site. But I guess staff's position on that is that we don't generally, it's not good practice to do code amendments for project specific, right? We want it to be, as Ellen explained in her presentation, we want it to be something that's more widely spread. But we do acknowledge that the Westlake Grove Design District does not have a variance process similar to, say, the Downtown Redevelopment Design District or the Lake Grove Village Center overlay. And so that's certainly something to consider as a better option to open up a variance process that would allow them to request a variance if they meet the criteria to address unique use, unique circumstances with the site, et cetera, rather than coming up with a specific code change for one project.
Are there certain site constraints that would create exceptions to that, such as like grade change or existing grade change? Where are there natural occurrences, for example, that would exempt?
Well, that's certainly something that could be written into, if a variance process were adopted there, that could be written into that process.
So there's nothing in the code, though, that has
Not-
exceptions like that.
Well, yeah, there's a major variance that allows where it says if it's not physically possible to do it, but I don't think that's the case here.
Okay,
I think there's other reasons.
I didn't know, I'm not real familiar with the site. I was just curious if there was any exemptions, I guess, in the code.
And I would also point out that there's pending state legislation with SB 1534, where that's sort of the, used to be HB 3414 on the last legislative session that will require cities to approve variances for certain, for housing for certain variance requests. And there's some criteria that have to be met, but it's not very rigorous. At least the way the current legislation is being drafted, there's a provision that says if a city has a variance process for, in all zones allowed residential that allows the same variances that are listed in the bill, then they are not subject to that state bill. They can use their own variance process. And so my recollection is that I believe that the Westlake Grove Design District is the only one that doesn't have a variance process. So if we added that to the code, then that would also have the purpose of removing us from having to apply that state law, and we could just apply our own local variance criteria. So that could be another argument. So again, that's something we need to look into. We're also doing our housing production. And I would just point out that one of the reasons why we tried to keep things to very housekeeping items and try not to get too policy heavy is that we know we're going to be doing this housing work, and what we don't want to do is things that are cross-purpose. We don't, once you enact a code regulation, it's really hard to take it back. So we're being extra cautious, and I know that obviously you've heard arguments on both sides for some of these things, but again, getting back to this single code amendment, that's why we would recommend looking at it later on from a staff perspective.
Am I able to make a clarifying statement of kind of the spirit of where that was coming from, or?
Well, you indicated that this did not have any, in your opinion, any financial effect.
No.
So that does not preclude you from participating. You
Okay.
made a courtesy abstention, recusal, so you can take
Yeah.
that back a little bit.
Just to provide a little further background of where this request was coming from, it was at the advisement of the architect that this piece of the code might have been an oversight from when the lot was rezoned to include multifamily. It was thought that it made sense when it was a commercial lot, and it makes less sense now that there would be this easement when typically in multifamily, the edges of the lot are used for resident parking and not for circulation.
And I would just say that if you look at the circulation plan for the Westlake Grove, it actually has connections through both purely residential, the WLG R2.5, and commercial, as well as the mixed. So I don't know that you can actually make that. Again, I'm not saying that I don't want to argue the merits of whether or not it should or shouldn't happen, but I'm just saying that I'm not sure that that actually is true, because it does clearly show a circulation plan between lots that have both purely residential or commercial, or that allows a mixture of both. So I don't know, and it does clearly say in there that that circulation plan applies to all WLG districts. So again, this is one of those things where we really kind of, you need to look at the legislative history, we need to kind of suss out the issues, but again, the back to the point of not being good practice, we generally don't want to make code changes on a project-by-project basis. That's generally not a good practice. We want it to be a wider applicable code amendment.
Okay. I guess we need to make a vote, or there needs to be a motion, I think is the correct process at this point, on whether we're going to recommend moving forward with the options that we've decided, even though there is, some difference of opinion on the particular options to choose.
You're just voting on what to do with this one.
What's that? No. So for this particular one, we vote to not include it and not continue the hearing. So I think that brings us back. We've now discussed all of the ones that are on the table, and I think we what's the process now, Mr. Boone? Do we need a motion to?
Yes, it would be a motion to move the package forward with the notations as indicated by the commissioners in the minutes. So as I heard it, we're moving all of the, you're recommending then that the council adopt all the maintenance and policy matters. Okay.
All right,
Do we then clarify, sorry,
I'll make
we
a motion.
clarify the three that had the options, like we clarify?
Right, you had the 2 days attached. Okay, comma 25%.
And
the
option one up
unopened.
there,
Okay.
exempt cottages facing
All right,
unimproved
let
and
me
open.
give it a shot. All right, so I will move to approve the maintenance and policy amendments as written, and with special note for item 12 to be 2 business days. For item 16, to have a common wall for at least 25% of the structure, and for policy item 1, with the cottage within 20 feet of a property line abutting a public street, the street can be unimproved or an unopened right-of-way.
I think you nailed it. Do we have a second?
Is there a reason we're not discussing any of the items that do not have a choice involved within them?
Well, I think a couple minutes ago, we opened it up to see if anyone else had comments on the items that do not have choice. And nobody spoke up as far as I can tell, but do you have a?
All right. Yeah, I personally would like not to move forward with policy item number 2.
You want to give us your reasoning?
Yeah, that's the one about the garages. I don't think there's any reason to move forward with it, really. You know, when we're looking at the purpose of why these, garage regulations exist, it's in order to minimize the effects, on the street frontage of, having a big bank of garages. And, moving it forward 2 feet forward or back, I mean, that will break up the plane to some degree, that does improve it. But I think it was written that way, that it must be further set back in order to continue minimizing the effect on the street. So I don't really see any purpose in changing that, since it's cohesive with, with the purpose of the regulations.
So, as I understand this, the main difference here is the way the code is currently written, you have to offset back by 2 feet. What's being proposed is you can either offset back or pull forward 2 feet. But in pulling forward, you can't obviously cross a setback line or anything like that. Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, doesn't really make a difference one way or the other. The result is kind of the same thing. Still get the 2 feet, still get the shadow line. It's just the orientation is different.
Any other comments on that one? Questions? I think we should still.
Well, I'm of the opinion to keep my motion in place unless.
Yes.
But I guess we can vote on it. If it doesn't get approved, somebody else can make a motion. Yes.
Yeah, I think we should stick with your motion and see how the votes come down.
I would just indicate, obviously, the commissioner's comments would be part of the record, and so when it goes up to city council, if it moves forward as a package, the council would have the opinion.
Yep. Do we need to repeat the motion? Make a.
I don't think we.
Make Philip do it again?
I think we do it again.
Okay. Christina, can you take a roll call on the vote?
Stewart?
Yes.
Ganona?
Yes.
Mitchell?
Yes.
Rigby?
No.
Najak?
Yes.
Ewing?
Yes. I think the yeses carry.
I got 4-2 on that. All right, this was a preliminary decision by the Planning Commission, and the written findings we brought back to the commission at this next regular meeting, which is the 26th of February. No vacations, no holidays, at 6:30.
Okay, moving forward, I think the next item on the agenda was other business. Do we have any other business? And then,
I had one question. When will we be doing the, I guess you called it planning for 2024? And what topics we were going to be discussing as a committee?
That will be at the next meeting, as I will explain on the schedule updates. But yeah,
So that happens in 2 weeks.
that's right. Yeah,
Okay.
we had originally planned it for today, but because the council's goal setting had to be postponed due to the ice storm primarily, we had to postpone the Planning Commission's goal setting because they're kind of informed by the council.
What is the process for that?
Well, it will be laid out very clearly in the memo, but essentially we're going to sort of go over what we did last year, the goals for 2023 and how we made progress on them, talk about some proposed goals for this year, as well as open up sort of to the commissioners whether or not there are any additional goals that you would like to undertake that are in support of the council's sort of overarching goals and objectives. And yeah, see if you have any additional input. We also often submit a sort of request for public input as well. At the same time that we sort of look to the Planning Commission, we'll ask the public if they have any suggestions. So we'll talk about it at that first work session. I'll take your input, incorporate that into sort of a final recommended set of goals for the second sort of work session on the goals in late March. So two meetings to talk about work plan to accomplish the goals.
Thank you.
I hope that was clear enough, but yeah, it'll be clear in the memo, absolutely.
I guess that's the perfect segue to schedule review.
That's right. So we've already talked about two of the main items that will be discussed at our next meeting on the 26th of February. So we'll have consideration of findings for the annual code amendments that we were talking about at the public hearing just a moment ago. We'll also have the first sort of work plan review for the Planning Commission's goals for 2024, as well as a tentatively scheduled request for a new neighborhood association in the sort of Mary's Woods area, but they're going to refer to this new neighborhood association as Mary's Landing. So there is a proposal to essentially start a new neighborhood association in a portion of the city where there currently is no recognized city neighborhood association. So that will be the third item that we'll consider at our next meeting on the 26th. We have canceled the March 11 Planning Commission meeting, so there will be no meeting on March 11. And on March 25th, we will have the second work session on the Commission's work plan for 2024, as well as an update on some stormwater code amendments that they're working on in the engineering department from Sonia and engineering. So that takes us at least through the end of March. I guess I should also mention there is a joint City Council and Planning Commission work session on housing production strategies on April 2nd as well. So that is the sort of next item after that.
I want to thank everyone for the time, especially members of the public that came and gave their testimony here today. No more business. We're adjourned.